In the dusty frontier town of Silver Creek, two young brothers stand before a judge who holds their fate in his weathered hands. Tommy, aged 12, grips his younger brother Billy's trembling fingers as the courtroom decides their future. Their parents died in a winter fever outbreak, leaving them with nothing but each other and the clothes on their backs. The judge's gavel is about to fall, sentencing them to a brutal work camp 300 miles away, when a commanding voice cuts through the murmur of the courtroom. Chief Ayana of the nearby Apache tribe steps forward, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. His dark eyes hold both wisdom and determination as he speaks words that will change 3 lives forever. The settlers gasp in shock. His own people shake their heads in disapproval. But sometimes family is found in the most unexpected places. What happens when 2 worlds collide and blood becomes less important than love? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The courthouse fell silent as Chief Ayana's words echoed off the wooden wall. Judge William Brennan adjusted his spectacles, studying the imposing figure who had just disrupted what should have been a routine proceeding. The Apache chief stood nearly 6 feet tall, his long black hair braided with silver threads that caught the afternoon light filtering through the dusty windows. Tommy clutched his father's pocket watch tighter, the gold surface warm against his palm. It was the only thing left of their old life, the only connection to the man who used to lift him onto his shoulders and tell him stories about the railroad crews he supervised. Now that man was buried in the frozen ground outside town, alongside Tommy's mother, victims of the fever that had swept through Silver Creek like a prairie fire. Your Honor, Chief Ayana continued, his English careful but confident. These boys need a family, not a work camp. I offer them a place in my tribe, a chance to grow strong and learn the ways of both worlds. The townspeople erupted in whispers. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, fanned herself dramatically. Surely the court cannot consider such an arrangement, she declared, her voice shrill with indignation. These are Christian children, not savages. Chief Ayana's expression remained calm, but Tommy saw something flicker in his dark eyes. The chief had heard such words before, had learned to let them pass like wind through grass. But there was strength in his stillness, a dignity that made some of the settlers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Judge Brennan had presided over this frontier court for 12 years. He had seen claim jumpers and cattle rustlers, witnessed the brutal realities of territory law. But this situation was unprecedented. The Homestead Act required white families to work the land, and the territorial government had made it clear that Indian adoption of white children was strongly discouraged. Billy pressed closer to his brother, his 8-year-old mind struggling to understand the adult conversations swirling around him. He remembered Chief Ayana from the trading post, where the Apache leaders sometimes came to exchange furs for supply. The chief had always been kind, once giving Billy a small wooden carving of a horse when his father wasn't looking. The law is quite clear, interrupted Reverend Matthews, a thin man whose black coat seemed to absorb all warmth from the room. These children belong with Christian families. The Smithson Work Farm has offered to take them both, provide them with honest labor and moral instruction. Tommy had heard stories about the Smithson place. Boys who went there rarely came back. Those who did spoke in whispers about 12-hour days in the fields, sleeping in barns, and meals that left bellies empty and spirits broken. The thought of Billy enduring such hardship made Tommy's jaw clench with determination. Chief Ayana stepped forward, addressing the judge directly. Your Honor, I have watched these boys at the trading post. The older one protects his brother, like a warrior guards his people. The younger one has eyes that see beauty where others see only dirt and stone. They have courage in their hearts. Is this not what you call Christian virtue? The logic was simple, but powerful. Judge Brennan found himself considering the chief's words more seriously than he had expected. He knew Ayana's reputation in the territory. The Apache leader had negotiated peace treaties, prevented conflicts that could have cost dozens of lives. He was respected even by those who feared his people. The territorial government has specific policies regarding such arrangements. The judge said carefully, interracial adoption requires approval from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Then we request that approval, Chief Ayana replied without hesitation. These boys have lost their family, My wife and I can offer them another. Is this not better than sending them to work like animals? Tommy felt a spark of hope for the first time since his parents' death. This stranger, this man from a different world, was fighting for them when no one else would. The pocket watch in his hand seemed to pulse with his heartbeat, as if his father's spirit approved of the chief's intervention. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the courtroom floor. Judge Brennan looked at the two boys, seeing their fear and uncertainty, their desperate need for someone to care about their future. Then he looked at Chief Ayana, standing with the patience of a man accustomed to waiting for justice. I will postpone sentencing for 1 week, the judge declared. This will allow time for proper consultation with territorial authorities and consideration of all parties involved. Chief Ayana nodded solemnly. Thank you, Your Honor. 1 week will be enough. As the courtroom began to empty, Tommy watched the Apache chief approach them. The man's presence was both intimidating and oddly comforting, like standing near a mountain that offered shelter from storm. The week passed like a fever dream. Tommy and Billy had been staying with Mrs. Patterson, the town seamstress, in a cramped room above her shop. The old woman meant well, but her constant prayers and worried glances made the boys feel like burdens rather than guests. Every morning Tommy watched from the window as Chief Ayana visited the courthouse, speaking quietly with Judge Brennan and territorial officials who had arrived from the capital. On the 7th day, the courtroom filled again. This time, a federal representative sat beside Judge Brennan, his crisp uniform and stern expression making it clear that this was no longer a local matter. Captain Morrison of the Territorial Indian Affairs Office had traveled 3 days to assess the situation personally. Chief Ayana entered with a leather folder containing documents Tommy couldn't read. The chief's wife, Ayana's heart, accompanied him for the first time. She was a small woman with gentle eyes and silver-streaked hair braided with colorful beads. When she looked at the boys, Tommy saw something he hadn't expected: maternal warmth. This is highly irregular, Captain Morrison began, shuffling through papers on the table. The Homestead Act clearly states that Indian adoption of white children requires extensive documentation, character references, and ongoing federal supervision. Judge Brennan leaned back in his chair. Chief Ayana has provided character references from 3 territorial judges, 2 army officers, and 5 prominent traders. His record of peaceful negotiation speaks for itself. Tommy held Billy's hand as they listened to adults debate their future like a business transaction. The pocket watch in Tommy's other hand had become his anchor, a reminder that he once had a father who called him son, and meant it. The question, Captain Morrison continued, is whether it serves the boys' best interests to be raised outside their own culture. Chief Ayana stood slowly. Captain Morrison, may I speak? The federal officer nodded reluctantly. These boys have no culture left except what we give them. Their parents are gone. Their relatives have not come forward. You offer them a work camp where they will learn only hardship and bitterness. Chief Ayana's voice remained steady, but Tommy heard passion beneath the calm words. My wife and I offer them a family where they will learn strength, respect for the land, and the wisdom of 2 peoples. Ayana's heart rose beside her husband. I have borne no children, she said in careful English, her accent soft but clear. The spirits have not blessed me with sons. Perhaps they saved my maternal love for these boys who need it most. Billy looked up at Tommy with wide eyes. She wants to be our mother, he whispered. Tommy felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built to protect himself from more loss. The idea of having a mother again, even one so different from the woman who used to sing him to sleep, stirred feelings he'd tried to bury. Captain Morrison frowned at his paperwork. Even if we approve this arrangement, there will be conditions. The boys must receive proper education in English and arithmetic. They must be taught Christian principles. They must be prepared to function in civilized society. We accept these conditions, Chief Ayana replied immediately. But we ask that they also learn Apache ways, so they understand the land that will be their home. Judge Brennan looked at Tommy directly. Son, you're old enough to have a voice in this. What do you want? Tommy stood on trembling legs, still holding Billy's hand. The courtroom fell silent, as everyone waited for his answer. He thought of the work camp, of Billy's small hands, blistered from labor too hard for a child, Then he thought of Chief Ayana's dignity, of Ayana's heart's gentle eyes, of the possibility that someone might actually want them. "We want to stay together," Tommy said, his voice stronger than he felt. "If Chief Ayana promises we'll stay together, then we'll go with him." Chief Ayana placed his hand over his heart. "I give you my word, spoken before these witnesses, and the spirits of my ancestors. You will remain brothers in my family, as you were brothers in your birth family." Captain Morrison signed the adoption papers with obvious reluctance. "This arrangement is provisional for 1 year. If the boys are not properly cared for, if they show signs of reversion to savage ways, they will be removed immediately." But Judge Brennan was already stamping the documents with his official seal. "The court approves this adoption under territorial law. Chief Ayana, these boys are now your legal responsibility." As they left the courthouse, Tommy noticed that some townspeople watched with approval, while others shook their heads in disapproval. But for the first time in weeks, he felt something resembling hope. The journey to the Apache settlement took 3 days through mountain trails that seemed to climb toward the clouds themselves. Tommy and Billy rode double on a gentle mare named Star, while Chief Ayana led the way on his black stallion, and Ayana's heart followed on a painted pony loaded with supplies. The boys had never been this far from Silver Creek. The familiar sights of the frontier town gave way to pine forests and rocky outcroppings that jutted from the earth like ancient monuments. Tommy found himself staring at landscape so vast and untamed, it made him feel both insignificant and somehow more alive than he'd felt in months. Billy adapted to horseback riding with the natural ease of childhood, but Tommy remained tense in the saddle, still processing the magnitude of their situation. Everything he had known was disappearing behind them with each mile, replaced by an uncertain future in a world he didn't understand. On the second evening, as they made camp beside a mountain stream, Ayana's heart approached them with a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. Her movements were gentle but purposeful, like someone accustomed to caring for precious things. "For you," she said, unfolding an Apache blanket woven in patterns of red, black and yellow. The geometric design seemed to tell stories Tommy couldn't read, but the blanket radiated warmth even before it touched his skin. Billy reached out to trace the intricate weaving with one small finger. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Ayana's heart smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. "My grandmother made this for her first son. Her son gave it to his first son. Now it comes to you, Tommy, as my first son." The weight of tradition in those words struck Tommy like a physical blow. This wasn't just a blanket, but a symbol of acceptance, of belonging to something larger than himself. He wrapped it around both him and Billy as they settled down to sleep under more stars than he'd ever imagined exist. Chief Ayana sat by the fire, working with patient hands to repair a bridle. "Tomorrow you will see your new home," he told them. "It may seem strange at first. Our ways are different from town ways. Will the other people like us?" Billy asked, his voice small in the mountain darkness. Chief Ayana considered this carefully. "Some will welcome you because I have chosen you as sons. Others will need time to understand why I have brought white children into our family. Change is difficult for all people, Apache and white alike." Tommy pulled the blanket tight. "What if we don't fit in? What if we can't learn your ways?" "Learning takes time," Chief Ayana replied. "A seed does not become a tree in one season. You will grow into your new life as gradually as the seasons change. But you must be patient with yourselves and with our people." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up toward the star-filled sky. Tommy had never felt so far from everything familiar. Yet something about the chief's steady presence and Ayana's heart's gentle attention made him feel less alone than he had since his parents' death. On the third day they crested a ridge and saw the Apache settlement spread below them in a sheltered valley. Hide-covered dwellings dotted the landscape like flowers, smoke rising from cooking fires, horses grazing in makeshift corrals. People moved between the structures with purposeful activity, and even from a distance, Tommy could sense the community's vitality. "It's bigger than I thought it would be," Tommy said, surprised by the settlement's size and organization. 63 people call this place home," Chief Ayana explained. "Families who have chosen to live in the old ways, while learning what we must from the new world." As they descended into the valley, people emerged from their dwellings to watch the arrival. Children ran alongside their horses, chattering in Apache and pointing at the two white boys. Tommy saw curiosity in some faces, suspicion in others, and outright hostility in a few. An elderly man with deep-set eyes and silver braids stepped forward as they reached the settlement center. He spoke rapidly in Apache to Chief Ayana, gesturing toward the boys with obvious disapproval. Chief Ayana replied calmly but firmly. The exchange continued for several minutes while Tommy and Billy sat on their horse, feeling like specimens under examination. Finally, Chief Ayana turned to them. "This is Grey Wolf, my uncle and a respected elder. He questions the wisdom of bringing white children into our family. I have told him that wisdom often appears as foolishness to those who fear change." Grey Wolf's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes studied the boys with the intensity of someone reading signs in nature. The first weeks in the Apache settlement passed in a blur of new experiences and constant adjustment. Chief Ayana and Ayana's heart lived in a large wickiup, made of wooden poles covered with animal hides and woven mats. Inside, the space was divided into areas for sleeping, cooking and storage, everything organized with careful efficiency. Tommy and Billy slept on buffalo robes near the fire, warmer and more comfortable than they had been in Mrs. Patterson's cramped room. But comfort couldn't ease the strangeness of waking to the sound of Apache voices, instead of English, of eating foods prepared with unfamiliar spices, of trying to understand a world governed by customs they couldn't yet comprehend. Billy adapted with the resilience of youth. Within days he was following Ayana's heart around the settlement, watching her gather plants and prepare meals. She taught him Apache words by pointing to objects and repeating their names until he could pronounce them correctly. "Shash," she would say, touching a bear hide. "Clishion," pointing to his dark hair. Tommy remained more guarded. He understood that Chief Ayana was being patient with them, but he felt the weight of scrutiny from other tribal members. Some women smiled at him kindly when he passed, but the men often watched him with expressions he couldn't read. He missed being able to communicate easily, missed understanding the conversations flowing around him. One morning, Chief Ayana called Tommy outside just after dawn. In his hands he held a small wooden horse, carved with intricate detail and painted with natural pigments. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, every muscle and mane hair rendered with loving precision. "This belonged to my son," Chief Ayana said quietly. "He died in a cavalry raid 5 winters ago. He was 14, like you will be soon." Tommy took the wooden horse carefully, feeling its smooth weight in his palms. "What was his name?" "Soaring Eagle. He loved horses more than any boy I have known. He could ride before he could walk properly, could gentle the wildest mustang with patience and respect." The chief's voice carried old grief, carefully controlled but still present. Tommy realized that this man had also lost a child, had also experienced the hollow ache of sudden absence. He would want his horse to bring joy to another boy. Chief Ayana continued, "To you if you will accept it." Tommy nodded, not trusting his voice. The gift felt sacred, a bridge between the son who was gone and the son who was here now. Billy emerged from the wickiup, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He saw the wooden horse and gasped with delight. "Tommy, it's beautiful." "Chief Ayana gave it to me," Tommy said, showing his brother the intricate carving. "It belonged to his..." Billy's expression grew serious with the gravity that sometimes surprised adults. "Then we have to take extra good care of it." That afternoon, Running Deer, Apache boy close to Tommy's age, approached them near the horse. He had been watching the newcomers from a distance, but this was the first time he had spoken directly to them. "You want to learn to ride Apache way?" he asked in careful English. Tommy looked at Billy, who nodded eagerly. "Yes, we'd like that." Running Deer led them to a gentle pintumar. "This is Windancer. She teaches children, never throws anyone, but you must show respect." For the next hour, Running Deer demonstrated how to approach the horse, how to speak to her in Apache, how to mount and guide her with subtle pressure, rather than harsh command. Billy took to it immediately, giggling with delight as Windancer responded to his tentative signals. Tommy found the experience more challenging. He was accustomed to the workhorses his father had used, animals trained for pulling rather than riding. But gradually, he began to understand the different relationship Apache people had with their horses, based on partnership rather than domination. As the sun began to set,
casting the settlement in golden light. Tommy felt something shift inside him. For the first time since arriving, he had spent an afternoon without constantly thinking about how different everything was. Instead, he had simply been present, learning something new, connecting with another boy. That evening, as the family gathered around their fire for the evening meal, Ayana's heart served a stew made with venison, wild onions, and herbs Tommy was beginning to recognize. The flavors were becoming familiar, comforting rather than Billy chatted in his mixture of English and Apache words, telling Chief Ayana about his riding lesson. The chief listened with the serious attention he gave to all tribal business, asking questions and offering gentle corrections to Billy's pronunciation. Tommy carved small pieces from his portion and fed them to the wooden horse, a ritual that made Billy smile and seemed to please Chief Ayana as well. After their first month in the settlement, Chief Ayana gathered Tommy and Billy near the fire pit as dawn broke over the mountain. The morning air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, sounds of the settlement awakening around them. "Today you receive your Apache names," he announced solemnly, "and with these names, you receive..." He held out 2 pairs of moccasins, each decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns that seemed to capture the movement of wind and water. The leather was soft as butter, dyed in earth tones that would blend with the mountain landscape. "From this day forward, you will be known as Braveheart," he said to Tommy, "for you have shown courage in protecting your brother and wisdom in accepting a new path." Tommy took the moccasins reverently. They were the most beautiful footwear he had ever seen, each bead placed with painstaking care by hands that understood the significance of the gift. "And you," Chief Ayana continued, kneeling to Billy's level, "will be called Little Wolf, for you have the keen eyes of a hunter and the loyalty of a pack leader." Billy's moccasins were smaller, but no less elaborate, decorated with tiny silver bells that chimed softly when he moved. His face lit up with wonder as he slipped them onto his feet. "These were made by Spider Woman, our finest beadworker," Chief Ayana explained. "She spent 2 weeks creating them, choosing each bead for its color and meaning. They mark your acceptance into our tribe as more than guests. You are now our sons." The formal naming ceremony took place that evening, with the entire settlement gathered in a circle around a central fire. Tommy felt nervous as Grey Wolf began speaking in Apache, his voice carrying across the valley like ancient music. Other tribal members added their voices, creating a rhythm that seemed to connect earth and sky. Running Deer whispered translations when he could. Grey Wolf speaks of the responsibility of names, how they shape the person who carries them. He says Braveheart must learn to lead with wisdom, not just courage. When Spider Woman approached them, Tommy was struck by her dignity. She was perhaps 60 years old, her silver hair braided with colorful ribbons, her hands still steady despite decades of intricate work. She spoke directly to the boys in Apache, then translated herself. "I told you that these moccasins will carry you on the path between 2 worlds. They are made with Apache hands but will walk in places Apache feet have never been. Remember always where they came from." As the ceremony continued, Tommy realized that receiving Apache names meant more than new words to call themselves. It meant accepting responsibility to honor both their birth heritage and their adopted culture. The weight of that responsibility felt both daunting and somehow right. The celebration lasted deep into the night, with traditional foods, stories told in both languages, and demonstrations of Apache skills. Tommy watched children who moved like shadows in games of stealth, saw women whose hands created beauty from raw materials, observed men who could read the landscape like an open book. Billy fell asleep in Ayana's heart's lap near midnight, but Tommy stayed awake, absorbing everything. He was beginning to understand that Apache culture wasn't simpler than white culture, just different. The complexity lay in different places, emphasized different values, measured success by different standards. Running Deer's father, Hawk Feather, taught Tommy a gambling game played with marked stones. The game required memory, strategy, and the ability to read opponents' intentions from subtle clues. Tommy lost consistently at first, but gradually began
understand the patterns. White men think Apache games are primitive, Hawk Feather said as they played. But this game teaches skills needed for hunting, for war, for understanding human nature. Every Apache child learns these lessons through play. As the fire burned lower and people began returning to their wiki-ups, Chief Iona approached Tommy. "How do your new moccasins feel?" Tommy looked down at his feet, noting how the soft leather had already begun conforming to his shape. "They feel like they were made for me." "Spider-Woman has that gift," Chief Iona replied. "She can look at a person and see their true size, their true shape, sometimes better than they know themselves." The settlement grew quiet, except for the natural sounds of night in the mountain. Tommy felt different than he had that morning, marked by ceremony and acceptance in ways that went deeper than legal documents or good intentions. As he prepared for sleep, Billy already curled up in his buffalo robe. Tommy carefully placed his new moccasins beside his head. Tomorrow he would wake up as Braveheart, with all the responsibility and possibility that name carried. The wooden horse sat nearby, a bridge between his past and present. But now he had moccasins that would carry him into his future, step by careful step, into whatever lay ahead. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Tommy found himself settling into the rhythms of Apache life more naturally than he had thought possible. The morning routine of tending horses, gathering firewood, and helping with daily tasks had become as familiar as breathing. Billy had grown taller and stronger, his pale skin now bronzed by mountain sun, his vocabulary a comfortable mixture of English and Apache words. The harvest ceremony marked their third month with the tribe. Tommy watched in fascination as the entire settlement worked together to process the crops they had grown in hidden valleys, gathering wild foods from the mountains, and preparing meat from hunting expeditions. The efficiency amazed him, but more than that, the sense of shared purpose reminded him of stories his father had told about barn-raising parties in his youth. Grey Wolf approached him during the preparations, carrying a small leather pouch decorated with symbols Tommy was beginning to recognize. The old man's demeanor had gradually softened toward the boys over the weeks, though he still watched them with calculating eyes. "Braveheart," he said, using Tommy's Apache name with careful pronunciation. "Chief Iona says you have questions about our spiritual ways." Tommy nodded. He had been curious about the ceremonies he witnessed, the prayers offered before meals, the way Apache people seemed to see connections between all living things. But he had been hesitant to ask, uncertain whether such questions would be welcome. Grey Wolf opened the leather pouch, revealing an assortment of items: small stones, dried plants, a piece of turquoise, a feather from a red-tailed hawk. "This is a medicine pouch. Not medicine like white doctors use, but medicine for the spirit, for maintaining balance between the seen and unseen worlds." He handed the pouch to Tommy, who accepted it with the reverence he had learned to show for sacred things. The leather was old and soft, worn smooth by countless hands. "Each item has meaning," Grey Wolf continued. "The stones represent the eternal strength of earth. The plants carry healing power from growing things. The turquoise connects us to sky and water. The feather reminds us that we are part of all life, not separate from it." Tommy examined each item carefully, feeling their different textures, noting how they seemed to belong together despite their diversity. "What am I supposed to do with it?" "Carry it. Learn from it. Add to it when you find things that speak to your spirit. But remember always that medicine power comes not from the objects themselves, but from understanding your place in the great circle of existence." That evening, as the harvest celebration continued around the central fire, Tommy sat with the medicine pouch in his hands, thinking about Grey Wolf's words. He had been raised in his parents' Methodist faith, taught to pray to God in heaven and follow the teachings of Jesus. But Apache spirituality seemed more connected to the immediate world around them, more concerned with living in harmony with natural forces than preparing for an afterlife. Little Wolf ran up to him, breathless from playing with the other children. His Apache name suited him perfectly. He moved with increasing confidence through the settlement, making friends with an ease that Tommy envied. "Braveheart, come play the hiding game," he said, tugging at his brother's sleeve. Tommy was about to decline when he noticed Chief Iona watching them with an expression of quiet satisfaction. The chief had been patient with Tommy's more serious nature, but Tommy realized he had been holding himself apart from the full experience of tribal life. "What's the hiding?" he asked. "Little Wolf. Running Deer and the others hide in the darkness. We have to find them using only sound and smell and feeling. No torches. No moon tonight. Spider-Woman says it teaches us to use senses that white people forget they have." Tommy looked up at the cloudy sky. The new moon meant complete darkness beyond the fire's reach. The idea of moving through unknown terrain without light seemed both terrifying and intriguing. "I'll try it," he said, surprising himself. The game began an hour later. 6 young people, including Tommy, stood at the edge of the firelight, while Running Deer and 3 others disappeared into the black forest. The rules were simple: find the hidden players using only natural senses. No talking except to claim a discovery. Tommy had never experienced such complete darkness. Without visual reference points, every sound became magnified. He could hear Little Wolf moving carefully to his left, could distinguish between the rustle of different types of leaves under careful footsteps, could detect variations in air movement that might indicate someone's presence. Gradually, his other senses began compensating for his blindness. He smelled Running Deer's distinctive scent near a pine tree, heard the slight whistle of someone's controlled breathing behind a boulder. When he finally touched Running Deer's shoulder and whispered, "Found," the satisfaction felt different from any game he had ever played. As they returned to the fire, Tommy realized he was carrying the medicine pouch, without conscious thought that it had become part of him during the evening's activities. Winter approached the mountain settlement, with the quiet inevitability of seasons change. Tommy had been living with Chief Ayana's family for 5 months now, and the boy who had once feared sleeping without walls around him now felt more at home under the vast sky than he ever had in Silver Creek's wooden building. Chief Ayana found him one morning as he tended the horses, brushing Winddancer's coat with the methodical care he had learned from Running Deer. The chief carried a hunting bow made from mountain juniper, its surface polished smooth and strung with seeds. "Today you learn to hunt," Chief Ayana announced. "A man must know how to provide for his family, and winter requires preparation." Tommy had handled his father's rifle before, but this bow felt different in his hand. The wood was warm and alive, shaped by someone who understood both the tree it came from and the purpose it would serve. Chief Ayana showed him how to hold it properly, how to draw the string with steady pressure, how to aim by instinct rather than mechanical sights. "White men think hunting is about killing," the chief explained as they walked through the forest. "Apache hunting is about understanding. You must know the animal's thoughts, predict its movements, respect its spirit even as you take its life for survival." They spent the morning learning to read tracks in the soft earth, identifying different animals by their markings and behavior patterns. Tommy discovered he had an aptitude for this kind of observation, finding details in the landscape that revealed stories of creatures passing through. "Here," Chief Ayana said, kneeling beside a fallen log. "A family of rabbits comes to feed each morning. See how the grass is bent, how the droppings tell us they feel safe in this place." Tommy studied the signs, beginning to understand how the forest was filled with information for those who knew how to read it. The broken twig at eye level indicated where a deer had browsed. The scratched bark showed where a bear had marked its territory. Everything was connected in ways he had never imagined. They found the rabbit family an hour later, 3 adults and 2 juveniles feeding in a small meadow. Chief Ayana handed Tommy the bow and guided his hands into proper position. "Do not think of the arrow hitting the target," he whispered. "Think of providing meat for Ayana's heart stew. Think of gratitude for the rabbit's sacrifice. Think of the cycle that connects all living things." Tommy drew the bowstring back, feeling the power stored in the bent wood. The largest rabbit sat perfectly still, as if sensing the moment of decision. Tommy released the arrow and watched it fly true, taking the animal's life cleanly and quickly. The kill affected him more than he had expected. Chief Ayana showed him how to thank the rabbit's spirit, how to use every part of the animal with respect. They butchered it carefully, saving the meat for food, the hide for clothing, the bones for tools. Nothing was wasted. "This is the Apache way," Chief Ayana explained. "We take only what we need, and we honor what we take. The rabbit gives its life so we may live. We give our gratitude, so its spirit may continue. That evening, as Ayana's heart prepared rabbit stew with wild onions and herbs, Tommy felt a satisfaction he had never experienced with store-bought meat. He had participated in the ancient cycle of survival, had learned skills that connected him to countless generations of hunters. Little Wolf listened wide-eyed to Tommy's account of the hunt, asking detailed questions about tracking and shooting. Running Deer nodded approvingly when he heard about the clean kill and proper thanks given to the animal's spirit. "Next week, you can come with us on the deer hunt," Running Deer told Tommy. "But first you must make your own arrows. Each hunter's arrows must be crafted by his own hand." Chief Ayana produced materials the next morning: straight shafts of birch, turkey feathers for fletching, obsidian points snapped with expert skill. Tommy spent the day learning to balance and straighten the shafts, to attach the feathers with precise spacing, to secure the sharp points with sinew wrapping. The work required patience and attention to detail that reminded him of his father's careful approach to mechanical repair. But there was something meditative about shaping tools with his hands, about creating implements that would extend his capabilities as a hunter and provider. As he worked, Grey Wolf sat nearby, crafting his own arrows with movements so practiced they seemed automatic. The old man watched Tommy's progress with occasional nods of approval. "Good arrows are like good friends," Grey Wolf said without looking up from his work. "They must be straight, reliable, and ready when you need them most. But they must also be released when the time comes. A hunter who cannot let go of his arrow cannot bring home meat." Tommy tested the balance of his finished arrow, noting how it felt natural in his hands despite being crafted from materials he had never worked with before. The obsidian point caught the firelight, sharp enough to penetrate hide and bone, beautiful enough to seem like art rather than a tool of necessity. 6 months had transformed the two orphaned boys from Silver Creek into young Apache warriors in training. As the first snows dusted the mountain peaks, Tommy could track deer through dense forest, speak conversational Apache, and navigate by stars his father had never taught him to recognize. Little Wolf had grown 3 inches and could gentle the wildest horses with patience that amazed even experienced horsemen. The winter celebration marked their transformation in ways that went beyond external skill. Chief Ayana called for war paint to be prepared, an honor usually reserved for young men approaching their 15th year. Spider-Woman mixed pigments from clay, berries and minerals, creating colors that seemed to pulse with life in the firelight. Grey Wolf approached Tommy with the reverence reserved for sacred ceremonies. In his weathered hands he held brushes made from pine needles and animal hair, tools used for generations to mark important transitions in Apache life. "This paint carries the power of your ancestors," Grey Wolf explained, though Tommy knew the old man referred to Apache ancestors rather than his birth family. "Each symbol tells the spirits who you are, what you have accomplished, what responsibilities you accept." Tommy knelt still as a statue while Grey Wolf painted his face with steady strokes. Red lines across his forehead represented courage in facing the unknown. Black circles around his eyes symbolized the vision needed to see truth beyond appearance. Yellow marks on his cheeks indicated his growing wisdom in Apache ways. Little Wolf received similar treatment, though his symbols reflected different qualities. Blue painted on his chin represented his gift for communicating with animals. White lines down his nose marked his pure heart and trustworthy nature. Green marks on his temples showed his connection to growing things. When they looked at each other in the polished metal mirror Spider-Woman provided, Tommy barely recognized themselves. The paint transformed them from white boys playing at being Apache into young warriors worthy of respect. But more than changing their appearance, the ceremony changed how they felt about themselves. "Now you must demonstrate your worthiness," Chief Ayana announced to the assembled tribe. "Each of you will tell a story that shows what you have learned about Apache values." Tommy had been expecting this moment, but still felt nervous as the entire settlement gathered around the central fire. He thought of all the stories he had heard during evening gatherings, tales that taught lessons about courage, wisdom, respect for nature, and loyalty to family. "I want to tell about the rabbit I killed last month," Tommy began, his voice gaining strength as he continued. "Chief Ayana taught me that hunting is not about taking life,
but about understanding life. The rabbit taught me that all creatures have their place in the great circle, and when we take from that circle, we must give something back. He described the hunt in detail, explaining how reading the forest signs felt like learning a new language, how the successful kill required not just skill, but spiritual preparation. The assembled Apache listened with the serious attention they gave to all sacred stories. The rabbit's death fed our family, but its spirit taught me something more important, that strength comes not from taking what you want, but from understanding what you need, that Apache warriors fight to protect, not to conquer. Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathering. Even Grey Wolf nodded with what might have been satisfaction. Little Wolf's story focused on his friendship with running deer, and the lessons learned from working with horses. He spoke about patience, about earning trust rather than demanding obedience, about how gentleness could be stronger than force. Winged Dancer taught me that real power comes from partnership. Little Wolf concluded, when I stopped trying to make her obey, and started trying to understand what she needed, she became my friend instead of just my horse. As the winter celebration continued with traditional foods and ceremonial dances, Tommy realized how much his understanding of strength and masculinity had changed. In Silver Creek, men proved themselves through physical dominance, through accumulating wealth and property, through controlling their environment. Apache men measured themselves differently. They valued wisdom over wealth, harmony over dominance, spiritual strength over physical force. A great warrior was someone who could provide for his family, protect his people, and maintain balance with the natural world. Running Deer's younger sister, Morning Star, approached Tommy as the evening wound down. She was perhaps 13, with intelligent eyes and the confident bearing of someone raised to expect respect, rather than demand it. Your war paint suits you, Braveheart, she said with a smile that made Tommy suddenly aware of how he must look to others. You no longer seem like a white boy trying to be Apache. You seem like an Apache man discovering who he was meant to be. Her words carried more weight than any formal recognition could have provided. Tommy touched the painted symbols on his face, feeling their significance settle into his bones, like truth finally spoken aloud. The trader arrived on a gray February morning, when snow still clung to the pine branches, and the settlement's breath formed clouds in the frigid air. Ezra Coleman was a familiar figure who made the dangerous journey into Apache territory 3 times each year, bringing goods the tribe couldn't produce and taking furs and crafts to sell in distant towns. Tommy recognized him immediately as one of the men who had frequented his father's store, but Coleman showed no sign of remembering the orphaned boy from Silver Creek. The months in the mountains had changed Tommy's appearance as much as his outlook. His pale skin now weathered brown, his soft town muscles replaced by the lean strength of someone who lived by hunting and physical labor. Coleman spread his wares on buffalo hides near the central fire pit. Steel knives, woolen blankets, sugar, coffee, ammunition and luxury items like mirrors and ribbon. But he also carried something more valuable to the settlement: news from the outside world. Territorial government's been asking questions, Coleman said as Chief Ayana examined a set of steel arrowheads. Some federal marshal came through Silver Creek last month, wanting to know about 2 white boys, supposedly living with Apache. Tommy felt his stomach tighten. Little Wolf, who had been playing nearby with wooden horses, moved closer to his brother with the instinctive caution they had both learned during their months of legal uncertainty. Chief Ayana's expression remained neutral, but Tommy caught the slight tension in his shoulder. What kind of questions? Whether you were treating them proper, whether they were getting civilized education, whether they wanted to come back to white society. Coleman spat tobacco juice into the snow. Seems some folks in town think it ain't natural for white children to live with Indians. And what did people tell this marshal? Grey Wolf asked, his voice carrying the careful control of someone expecting bad news. Coleman shrugged. Most folks said they didn't know nothing. But Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, she told him she thought it was a crime against Christian decency. Said children shouldn't be raised by heathens. No offense intended. Chief Ayana accepted the informal apology with a slight nod, but Tommy saw anger flicker in his dark eyes. Did this marshal say what he planned to do? He was asking about the legal papers, whether the adoption was properly recorded, whether the boys were being educated according to territorial requirements. Coleman pulled out a folded newspaper from his pack. "This might interest you. Article in the Silver Creek Tribune about your situation." Tommy's hands shook slightly as he unfolded the newspaper. The headline read, "Local Orphans Thrive with Apache Family." Below it was the article Sarah Martinez had written after her visit to the garden. But this story focused on his and Little Wolf's adaptation to tribal life. The article described their transformation in positive terms, mentioning their Apache names, their skills in hunting and horsemanship, their integration into tribal culture. But it also raised questions about their education and future prospects in a rapidly changing territorial society. "Miss Martinez seems sympathetic to your situation," Coleman noted. "But not everyone feels the same way. There's talk of new federal policies about Indian adoption, stricter requirements for cross-cultural families." Little Wolf pressed against Tommy's side as he read selected portions of the article aloud. The newspaper felt like a message from another world, reminding them that their peaceful life in the mountains existed within a larger political context they couldn't control. Chief Ayana studied the newspaper with the same careful attention he gave to weather signs before hunting expeditions. "This marshal, did he say when he might visit our settlement?" "Didn't give specifics, but he seemed to think it would be soon. Spring maybe, when the mountain passes clear." Coleman began packing his remaining goods. "If I were you, I'd make sure those boys can demonstrate they're getting proper schooling. Government men care a lot about reading and writing and arithmetic." That evening, the tribal council met in emergency session. Tommy and Little Wolf weren't invited to participate, but they could hear the serious discussions continuing long after their usual bedtime. Voices rose and fell in Apache, occasional English words, like federal and legal, punctuating conversations they couldn't fully understand. Ayana's heart sat with them in the wickiup, working on beadwork with hands that moved more restlessly than usual. She had been teaching them to read Apache stories recorded in pictographs, but Tommy realized this wouldn't satisfy federal inspectors looking for evidence of proper education. "What happens if they make us go back?" Little Wolf asked quietly. Tommy looked at his brother, noting how the months had changed him from a frightened child into a confident young person who belonged in this mountain world. The thought of Little Wolf being forced back into white society, into institutions that wouldn't understand or value what he had become, made Tommy's chest tighten with protective fury. "They won't," Tommy said firmly. "Chief Ayana won't let." But even as he spoke the words, Tommy understood that there were forces beyond Chief Ayana's control, laws and policies and prejudices that could reach even into these remote mountains to disrupt the family they had built together. The federal marshal arrived on a warm April morning, when wildflowers painted the mountain meadows in brilliant colors. Marshal William Garrett rode into the settlement with 2 deputies and a territorial clerk, their uniforms and official bearing creating an immediate tension that rippled through the community like wind across water. Tommy recognized the authority in Marshal Garrett's weathered face, the same cold certainty he had seen in Captain Morrison's eyes during the adoption hearing. This was a man accustomed to enforcing federal law regardless of local circumstances or personal feeling. Chief Ayana met the officials at the settlement's edge with the formal dignity he reserved for important negotiations. Gray Wolf flanked him on one side, Running Deer's father Hawk Feather on the other. The visual message was clear. This Apache leader stood with the full support of his people. Marshal Garrett, Territorial Indian Affairs, the lawman announced, dismounting from his horse with military precision. "I'm here to investigate reports concerning 2 white minors allegedly living under irregular adoption arrangement." "There is nothing irregular about legal adoption papers signed by a territorial judge," Chief Ayana replied calmly. "Those boys are my sons under both Apache law and territorial statute." Marshal Garrett produced a leather folder containing documents Tommy couldn't read from his position 20 yards away. "Federal guidelines for cross-cultural adoption have been updated since your original arrangement. We need to verify compliance with new educational and welfare standards." Tommy felt Little Wolf's hand slip into his.
as they watched the confrontation unfold. Around them, other tribal members had gathered at respectable distances, their faces showing mixtures of concern and barely controlled anger. This wasn't the first time federal officials had disrupted their lives with arbitrary rules and sudden policy changes. "Where are the boys?" Marshal Garrett asked, scanning the crowd until his eyes settled on Tommy and Little Wolf. "Thomas and William Morrison, according to our records. They are called Braveheart and Little Wolf," Chief Ayana corrected firmly. "They are my sons, and they will be treated with the respect due to members of this tribe." The marshal approached them with the same careful assessment Tommy remembered from livestock buyers examining horses at market. His gaze took in their Apache clothing, their sun-darkened skin, their confident posture that no longer showed the fear and uncertainty of 7 months ago. "Boys, I'm Marshal Garrett. I'm here to ensure your welfare and proper development. How are you being treated?" Tommy straightened to his full height, drawing on the quiet dignity he had learned from watching Chief Ayana handle difficult situations. "We're being treated as sons, Marshal, as family. Are you receiving an adequate education? Can you read and write English? Do you understand the refinity?" Before Tommy could answer, Chief Ayana stepped forward. "My sons are educated in the knowledge they need for their lives. They can track animals, predict weather, speak 2 languages, understand the stars, and survive in wilderness that would kill most white men." Marshal Garrett's expression suggested this wasn't the kind of education federal policy had in mind. "Can they read the Bible? Do they know American history? Can they function in civilized society?" The word civilized hung in the air like an insult. Tommy saw Grey Wolf's jaw tighten, noticed how other tribal members shifted restlessly at the implied judgment of their way of life. "I can read," Tommy said clearly. "Little Wolf is learning. We know enough American history to understand that government promises aren't always." One of the deputies snorted with what might have been amusement, but Marshal Garrett's face remained stern. He turned to Little Wolf, kneeling to the boy's eye level with practiced authority. "Son, do you want to stay here, or would you prefer to return to a proper American home with people of your own kind?" Little Wolf looked at the marshal with the steady gaze he had learned from watching Apache adults handle difficult situations. "These are people of my own kind. Chief Ayana is my father. Ayana's Heart is my mother. Braveheart is my brother. Running Deer is my friend. This is my home. But wouldn't you like to attend a real school, to learn to read properly, to prepare for a future in American society?" "I am learning what I need to know for my future," Little Wolf replied with quiet confidence. "And my future is here." Marshal Garrett stood slowly, clearly frustrated by responses that didn't fit his expectations. He had probably anticipated finding frightened children grateful for rescue from savage conditions. Instead, he faced young people who spoke with conviction about their chosen life. "I'll need to conduct individual interviews," he announced, "away from tribal influence. And I'll need to observe living conditions, educational facilities, and evidence of proper moral instruction." Chief Ayana's bronze star badge caught sunlight as he nodded agreement. "You may observe what you wish. My sons have nothing to hide, and neither do I." But Tommy noticed the marshal's hand resting on his service revolver, noted the way the deputies positioned themselves for quick access to their weapons. These weren't men conducting a welfare check. They were federal agents prepared to enforce their authority, regardless of what they found. That evening, Chief Ayana called for an emergency council meeting around the sacred fire that had burned continuously for 3 generations. The council fire staff, carved from ancient oak and decorated with eagle feathers and medicine bundles, stood at the center of the gathering, as tribal elders and respected warriors formed a circle. Tommy and Little Wolf sat with the other young people on the outer ring, but their situation was the focus of every conversation. The federal marshal had spent the afternoon conducting his investigation, examining their living conditions, testing their knowledge of English, and asking probing questions about their treatment and future plans. Grey Wolf rose first, his weathered hands gripping the council staff with the authority of age and wisdom. "The white government sends men to judge whether we are fit to raise children who chose to be our children. They measure civilization by whether boys can recite their multiplication tables, but they do not ask whether these boys can track deer, understand weather signs, or speak with respect to their elders. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Spider-Woman nodded emphatically, her silver hair gleaming in the firelight. I have watched these boys grow from frightened children into young Apache men. Braveheart shows wisdom beyond his years. Little Wolf brings joy to our horses and laughter to our camp. Why should white men in distant offices decide their fate? Running Deer's father, Hawk Feather, took the staff next. The marshal asked me whether the boys were being prepared for productive lives in American society. I told him they were being prepared for productive lives as human beings. Is this not more important? Chief Ayana accepted the staff with the solemnity befitting the gravity of their situation. Around the fire, faces showed determination mixed with concern. Everyone understood that federal authority could override tribal decisions, that laws written in Washington carried more weight than bonds forged through months of shared life. Marshal Garrett has given us 3 choices, Chief Ayana announced, his voice carrying across the silent gathering. The boys can return voluntarily to white guardianship. They can remain here, under increased federal supervision, with mandatory attendance at a government school 30 miles away, or they can be removed by force if we refuse to comply with new federal standards. Tommy felt his chest tighten. Each option represented a form of loss, a breaking of the family bonds that had become more real to him than blood relationships. The idea of leaving this mountain home, these people who had accepted him completely, made him feel hollow with anticipatory grief. Little Wolf stood suddenly, his young voice carrying surprising strength. May I speak to the council? Chief Ayana hesitated. Tribal tradition usually limited council participation to adults, but these were unusual circumstances. He nodded slowly and handed the staff to his adopted son. I was 8 years old when you first brought us here, Little Wolf began, his words careful but confident. I remember being afraid of everything, of the food, of the language, of sleeping without walls around me. But I also remember how Ayana's heart held me when I cried for my dead mother, how Running Deer taught me to gentle horses, how Grey Wolf showed me the stars and their stories. He paused, looking around the circle at faces that had become as familiar as breathing. Marshal Garrett asked me if I wanted to go to a real school. But this mountain has been my school. You have all been my teachers. I have learned to be brave from Chief Ayana, to be patient from the horses, to be wise from listening to council meetings like this one. Tommy rose to stand beside his brother, accepting the staff when Little Wolf offered it. The marshal thinks we're being held against our will, that we don't understand what we're giving up by staying here, but we understand better than he does what we would lose by leaving. His voice grew stronger as he continued. In Silver Creek, Little Wolf and I were orphans waiting to be sent to a work camp. Here, we are sons with a father who teaches us honor, a mother who shows us kindness, and a people who accept us as family. The federal government wants to measure our education by how well we can recite American history. But we are living American history. We are proof that different peoples can become family when they choose love over fear. The council fire crackled in the silence that followed. Tommy handed the staff back to Chief Ayana, who held it for a long moment before speaking. Tomorrow, Marshal Garrett expects our decision. Tonight we must choose between submission to unjust law and resistance that could bring soldiers to our village. Either path carries risk, but some risks are worth taking to protect what matters most. Grey Wolf's voice carried the weight of decades when he spoke. We have hidden in these mountains to preserve Apache ways. Perhaps it is time to stop hiding and show the world that Apache ways include the wisdom to love children regardless of the color of their skin. Dawn brought unexpected visitors to the Apache settlement. Tommy woke to the sound of multiple horses approaching, and voices calling greetings in English rather than Apache. Through the Wikiup's entrance, he saw a group of riders that made his heart leap with recognition and surprise. Sarah Martinez sat astride a sturdy mountain horse, her reporter's notebook secured in saddlebags, but her purpose clearly extending beyond journalism. Beside her rode Judge Brennan from Silver Creek, his weathered face showing the strain of the long mountain journey. Most surprising of all was the third rider, Reverend Matthews, the same minister who had argued against the adoption 9 months earlier.
Chief Ayana emerged from his morning prayers to greet the unexpected delegation. Marshal Garrett stepped out of the temporary shelter he had constructed near the settlement's edge, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon, until he recognized the territorial judge's authority. "Your Honor," Marshal Garrett said stiffly, "I wasn't expecting judicial oversight of this federal investigation." Judge Brennan dismounted slowly, his joints protesting the hard ride through mountain passes. "Marshal Garrett, I received word of your investigation through official channels. Given my involvement in the original adoption proceedings, I felt obligated to observe your fact-finding mission personally." Sarah Martinez approached Tommy and Little Wolf with a warm smile that reminded them of better times, when their future seemed secure and their place in the Apache family unquestioned. "Hello, boys. You've grown since I last saw you." Tommy noticed she carried a thick folder of papers along with her notebook. "Miss Martinez, why are you here?" "I've been investigating federal adoption policies for a series of articles. When I learned about Marshal Garrett's visit, I thought you might need some additional documentation." She glanced meaningfully toward the folder. "Sometimes, federal agents don't have access to all relevant information when making important decisions." Reverend Matthews remained mounted, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the settlement. Tommy expected hostility from the minister who had once called Apache people savages, but instead saw something that might have been thoughtful assessment. Marshal Garrett clearly felt his authority being challenged by the arrival of these observers. "Judge Brennan, my investigation is being conducted under federal authority. Territorial jurisdiction doesn't apply to matters of Indian affairs." "Perhaps not," the judge replied mildly, "but territorial law certainly applies to adoption proceedings involving territorial residents. I'd like to review the boy's current status before any federal action is taken." Chief Ayana stepped forward with the diplomatic skill that had kept his people safe through decades of changing government policies. "All visitors are welcome at our council fire. We have nothing to hide from federal agents, territorial judges, or anyone else who comes seeking truth." The morning took on the quality of a formal hearing as various parties presented their position. Marshal Garrett read from federal guidelines that emphasized standardized education, cultural assimilation, and preparation for integration into mainstream American society. Judge Brennan listened carefully, then asked to speak privately with Tommy and Little Wolf. They walked to a quiet area near the horse corrals, far enough from the adults to speak freely. "Boys, I need you to be completely honest with me," Judge Brennan said. "Are you happy here? Do you feel safe? Do you want to stay with Chief Ayana's family?" "Yes, sir," to all three questions, Tommy replied without hesitation. Even knowing that staying might mean attending government school, having federal agents inspect your living conditions regularly, perhaps being separated from the tribe if conditions don't meet Washington standards. Little Wolf looked up at the judge with eyes that held more maturity than most children possessed at 9 years old. "Judge Brennan, do you remember what you told us in court, that you wanted what was best for us?" The judge nodded. "This is what's best for us. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. Chief Ayana and Ayana's heart love us like real parents. The tribe has accepted us like real family. We've learned things here that no government school could teach us." Tommy added, "We know the federal government can force us to leave, but we also know that would be wrong. Sometimes adults have to choose between what's legal and what's right." Judge Brennan studied their faces for a long moment. "What would you say to people who argue that you're being deprived of opportunities available in white society?" "We'd say they should visit our settlement and see what opportunities we have here," Tommy replied. "Then ask themselves whether those other opportunities are worth giving up." Family. Sarah Martinez appeared at Judge Brennan's shoulder, holding her thick fold. "Your Honor, I have documentation that might interest you. Petition signatures from Silver Creek residents, supporting the boys' continued placement with Chief Ayana. Character references for the chief from military officers and territorial officials. And comparative educational assessments, showing these boys have learned more practical skills in 9 months than most children learn in years of formal schooling." The petition scroll she unrolled contained dozens of signatures, including several that surprised Tommy. Miss Patterson, the seamstress who had housed them before the adoption. Frank Morrison, the postal worker. even some names he didn't recognize but that apparently carried weight with territorial authorities. The final hearing took place around the council fire, as the sun reached its zenith, casting sharp shadows between the gathered witnesses. Judge Brennan had requested formal testimony from all parties before making his recommendation to federal authority. Marshal Garrett sat stiffly beside his territorial superior, clearly uncomfortable with the proceedings, but unable to object to proper judicial review. Chief Ayanna spoke first, standing with the dignity that had impressed territorial officials for 2 decades. Honorable Judge, 9 months ago you granted me the privilege of adopting 2 boys who needed family. Today I ask you to confirm that those boys have found what they needed and become what they were meant to become. He gestured toward Tommy and Little Wolf, who stood beside him wearing their Apache clothing with natural confidence. Braveheart has learned to hunt, to track, to read the language of earth and sky. He shows wisdom in counsel, courage in danger, and loyalty to family that honors both his birth parents and his chosen people. Little Wolf has gentled horses that experienced trainers could not handle. He speaks our language as naturally as breathing, understands our customs as if born to them, and brings joy to our community that enriches all our lives. Judge Brennan made careful notes as Chief Ayanna continued. You asked whether they receive proper education. They read in 2 languages, understand mathematics through practical application, know history through stories that teach wisdom rather than mere fact. They study astronomy by watching actual stars, learn geography by traveling mountain trails, and discover science by observing how all living things connect to each other. Marshal Garrett's expression suggested skepticism about this non-traditional curriculum, but he remained silent as the judge had requested. Reverend Matthews surprised everyone by asking to speak next. The minister who had once opposed the adoption approached the fire with obvious nervousness, but his voice carried conviction when he began. Judge Brennan, I came here prepared to support Marshal Garrett's concerns about proper Christian upbringing. I expected to find children corrupted by savage influences, deprived of moral instruction and spiritual guidance. He paused, looking directly at Tommy and Little Wolf. Instead, I found young men who demonstrate kindness, respect humility and courage. They honor their elders, care for those weaker than themselves, show gratitude for what they receive, and accept responsibility for their actions. The minister's words carried weight precisely because of his previous opposition. These boys have learned Christian virtues better than many children raised in our churches. If this is the result of Apache influence, then perhaps we white Christians should examine our own methods of moral instruction. Sarah Martinez presented her documentation with the thoroughness of someone who understood the importance of official records. The petition contained over 100 signatures from Silver Creek residents, including several prominent business owners and territorial officials. Judge Brennan, public opinion has shifted dramatically since the original adoption hearing. People have watched these boys thrive under Chief Ayanna's care. They've seen the positive impact of cross-cultural family bonds. They want to see this experiment in tolerance and understanding continue. She produced letters from Army officers, praising Chief Ayanna's character, from traders who testified to his honesty and reliability, from territorial judges who had worked with him on treaty negotiations. The accumulated evidence painted a picture of a man whose reputation extended far beyond his immediate community. Most compelling was a letter from the territorial governor himself, supporting the adoption and praising it as an example of successful cooperation between Apache and white community. Federal policy, the governor noted, should encourage such positive relationships rather than disrupting them. Marshal Garrett finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority, but lacking its earlier certainty. The boys appear healthy and well cared for. Their English remains fluent and they demonstrate knowledge of basic arithmetic and geography. However, federal guidelines require standardized curriculum and certified instruction. Judge Brennan set down his pen and looked around the assembled group. Marshal Garrett, federal guidelines also emphasize the best interests of the children involved. These boys are thriving in ways that standardized education might not achieve. Tommy felt the moment's importance settle around him like weight. Everything they had built together, all the bonds formed through shared experience and mutual choice, hung in the balance of legal interpretation and governmental discretion. The judicial ruling document Judge Brennan produced from his saddlebags bore official territorial seals and federal stamps. He read from it slowly, his voice carrying across the silent settlement. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, this court finds that the adoption of Thomas and William Morrison by Chief Ayana of the Apache people serves the best interests of the children and the community. The adoption is hereby confirmed under territorial law and recommended for federal recognition. He looked directly at Marshal Garrett. Furthermore, this court recommends that federal authorities recognize this placement as a successful model for cross-cultural adoption, worthy of protection rather than disruption. The silence that followed felt different from the tense quiet of earlier moments. This was the pause that comes after important words have been spoken, when everyone absorbs the magnitude of what has just occurred. 6 months after the federal hearing, autumn painted the mountains in familiar gold and crimson, as Tommy celebrated his 15th birthday according to Apache tradition. The settlement had grown by 3 families who sought the safety and community Chief Ayana's people offered, and the expanded population brought new energy to their mountain home. Spider Woman had spent weeks creating a family portrait, using traditional beadwork techniques, crafting a wall hanging that depicted Chief Ayana, Ayana's heart, Tommy, and Little Wolf surrounded by symbols representing their shared experiences. Eagle feathers marked Tommy's hunting achievements, horse designs celebrated Little Wolf's gift with animals, and a central fire symbol represented the family bonds that had grown stronger through legal challenges and federal scrutiny. Tommy studied the portrait as Spider Woman added final details, marveling at how completely it captured their transformation from desperate orphans into confident young Apache men. His reflection was interrupted by Running Deer's arrival with news that would reshape his understanding of adulthood in Apache society. Braveheart Morning Star's father wants to speak with you and Chief Ayana, Running Deer announced with a grin that suggested he knew more than he was saying. Tommy felt his pulse quicken. Morning Star had grown from the confident 13-year-old girl who had complimented his war paint into a beautiful 16-year-old woman whose intelligence and kindness had captured his attention complete. Their friendship had deepened over the months, but Apache courtship customs required formal negotiations between families before romantic intentions could be openly acknowledged. Chief Ayana emerged from his afternoon prayers with the serene expression he wore when facing important decisions. Strong Bear wishes to discuss his daughter's future, he said simply. This is a great honor for our family. The formal meeting took place that evening in Strong Bear's wickiup, with both families present along with Grey Wolf as an elder witness. Strong Bear was a respected warrior and horse trainer, whose daughter had inherited his skill with animals and his wife's artistic talents. Chief Ayana, your son Braveheart has shown himself to be a young man of character and ability. Strong Bear began with ceremonial formality. My daughter Morning Star speaks of him with respect and affection. If the spirits approve, I would welcome discussions about their future together. Tommy struggled to maintain the composure expected of a young Apache man, while his heart raced with excitement and nervousness. Morning Star sat with her eyes modestly downcast, but he caught her quick smile when she thought no one was looking. Chief Ayana responded with equal formality. Strong Bear, you honor my family with this proposal. Braveheart has shown wisdom beyond his years and courage worthy of a warrior. He would be fortunate to earn Morning Star's hand in marriage. The negotiations that followed established terms that seemed more like a celebration than a business transaction. Morning Star would finish her training with the settlement's medicine woman before any wedding ceremony. Tommy would demonstrate his ability to provide for a family by successfully completing a vision quest and establishing his own horse herd. The families would share wedding expenses and collaborate on building a home for the young couple. Most importantly, both young people had to confirm their mutual desire for the union, without family pressure influencing their decision. When Strong Bear asked Tommy directly about his intentions, the words came easier than he had expected. I would be honored to court Morning Star if she will have me. I have loved her kindness to animals, her skill at beadwork, her quick mind,
her generous spirit. I believe we could build a good life together. Morningstar's response was equally direct. Braveheart has proven himself worthy of respect through his dedication to learning, Apache ways, and his loyalty to his family. If our fathers approve, I would welcome his courtship. The formal ceremony concluded with the exchange of gifts between families. Strong Bear presented Tommy with a wedding bracelet made from silver traded with Mexican craftsmen. Intricate metalwork that had been passed down through 3 generations of his family. This bracelet belonged to my grandmother, who wore it for 53 years of marriage, Strong Bear explained. She said it would bring long life and happiness to any couple blessed by true love. Tommy accepted the bracelet with trembling hands, understanding that he held not just jewelry but a symbol of trust and acceptance that extended far beyond his individual relationship with Morningstar. The Apache people were offering him a place in their continuing story, a role in the ancient cycle of families forming and growing and passing wisdom to the next generation. As the evening celebration continued with traditional foods and congratulatory speeches from tribal elders, Tommy realized that his transformation was complete in ways he could never have imagined 18 months ago. He was no longer a white boy adopted by Apache Cherry, but a young Apache man preparing for the responsibilities of marriage, family, and community leadership. The wooden horse his birth father had carved still sat beside his sleeping robes, a reminder of where he came from. But the silver bracelet on his wrist pointed toward where he was going, toward a future built on love chosen rather than blood inherited. 1 year later, Tommy stood at the altar of the newly constructed Silver Creek Community Church, wearing a carefully tailored suit that represented the best of both worlds he now inhabited. Morningstar approached in a wedding dress that combined traditional Apache beadwork with white satin fabric, creating something entirely new yet respectful of both cultural traditions. The wedding ceremony itself reflected the changes that had swept through the entire region since the federal hearing. Reverend Matthews, transformed by his exposure to Apache spirituality, had worked with Chief Ayana to create a service that honored both Christian and Native American beliefs about marriage and family. Judge Brennan performed the legal ceremony, his presence lending official weight to a union that had required careful negotiation with territorial authority. But it was Chief Ayana who offered the Apache blessing, speaking in both languages so all guests could understand the ancient words about partnership, respect, and the sacred responsibility of creating new life. The church overflowed with an unprecedented gathering. Apache families sat beside white settlers, territorial officials shared pews with tribal elders, and newspaper reporters from 3 different towns documented what many considered a historic moment of cultural cooperation. Little Wolf, now 11 and showing signs of the height he would eventually achieve, served as Tommy's best man. He had grown into his Apache name completely, his natural way with horses earning him recognition as the settlement's most promising young trainer. His graduation certificate from the new territorial school hung proudly in Chief Ayana's wickiup, representing another bridge between 2 educational systems. The school itself represented the kind of compromise that seemed impossible before Tommy and Little Wolf's adoption forced people to reconsider their assumptions. Located halfway between Silver Creek and the Apache settlement, it offered instruction in both English and Apache, taught practical skills alongside academic subjects, and welcomed students from all cultural backgrounds. Sarah Martinez, now working for a major territorial newspaper, covered the wedding as part of her ongoing series about successful integration between Native and white communities. Her articles had attracted national attention, inspiring similar experiments in cross-cultural adoption and education throughout the Western Territories. This wedding represents more than 2 young people finding love, she wrote in her notebook as she watched the ceremony. It symbolizes the possibility that different peoples can create something new together without losing what makes them unique. The reception took place in Silver Creek's largest hall, with food provided by both communities and entertainment that showcased the best of Apache and frontier traditions. Tommy watched in amazement as Miss Henderson, the banker's wife who had once called Apache people savages, taught Apache children to perform a traditional Scottish reel, while Grey Wolf demonstrated traditional drumming techniques to fascinated white teenagers. During the evening festivities, Judge Brennan approached Tommy with a document that bore official territorial seals. "This is for you and Morningstar," he said quietly, a wedding gift from the territorial government. Tommy unfolded the paper carefully, his reading skills now sufficiently advanced to understand legal language. The document granted him and Morning Star homestead rights to 160 acres of mountain land adjacent to the Apache settlement, officially recognizing their right to establish a ranch that would serve both communities. The territorial governor believes your family represents the future of this region, Judge Brennan explained. Cooperation instead of conflict, understanding instead of fear, prosperity built on mutual respect rather than domination. Morning Star joined them, her beaded wedding dress rustling with tiny bells that created music with every movement. She had proven herself gifted not just in traditional Apache crafts, but in the business skills needed to market their work to growing urban markets throughout the territory. "We want to establish a training center," she told Judge Brennan. "A place where Apache young people can learn modern business practices while maintaining their cultural knowledge, and where white children can learn traditional skills that might save their lives on the front." The vision they described had been developing through months of conversation with tribal elders and territorial officials. A working ranch that would demonstrate sustainable land use practices, a school that would bridge cultural differences through practical education, and a community that would prove different peoples could prosper together. As the evening wound down and guests began the journey back to their various homes, Tommy found himself standing with Chief Aiyana on the church steps, looking out over a landscape that held both his past and his future. "Do you ever regret your decision?" Tommy asked the man who had risked everything to give two orphaned boys a chance at family. Chief Aiyana smiled with the contentment of someone whose gamble had exceeded his wildest hope. "A man who saves two boys and gains a daughter, a son-in-law, and the respect of two communities has made a good trade." The silver bracelet on Tommy's wrist caught moonlight as he helped Morning Star into their wagon for the journey to their new home, their new life, their new chapter in a story that had begun with desperate courage and grown into something none of them could have imagined. 2 years after the wedding, Little Wolf stood before a classroom of 30 children, ranging in age from 6 to 16, half Apache and half white, teaching them the principles of horse training that had made him locally famous despite his young age. At 13, he possessed an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that impressed experienced ranchers and tribal elders alike. The schoolhouse that housed his classes represented the fulfillment of Tommy and Morning Star's vision. Built on their homestead land with materials donated by both communities, it served as both educational facility and practical training center where children learned skills that prepared them for life in a rapidly changing territory. "Remember," Little Wolf told his students as they approached a nervous young Mustang in the training corral, "the horse decides whether to trust you. Your job is to prove you deserve that trust." Among his students was Sarah Jenkins, Judge Brennan's 8-year-old granddaughter, who had inherited her grandfather's careful judgment and applied it to understanding animal psychology. Beside her stood Joseph Chen, Miss Chen's nephew from California, whose family had sent him west to learn practical frontier skills that urban schools couldn't provide. The diversity of the student body reflected changes that had swept through the entire region since Tommy and Little Wolf's adoption, had forced people to reconsider their assumptions about cultural boundaries. Success bred imitation, and 3 other cross-cultural families had formed in neighboring communities, creating a network of cooperation that strengthened both native and white settlements. Little Wolf watched with pride as Sarah Jenkins successfully encouraged the Mustang to accept a halter, her patient approach demonstrating principles he had learned from years of watching Apache horsemen work. These children were growing up with skills and perspectives that neither culture could have provided alone. Teacher Little Wolf, called Miguel Santos Jr., the 10-year-old son of the food pantry coordinator, whose family had moved from Silver Creek to help establish the integrated community. Why do Apache horses seem gentler than ranch horses? The question opened an opportunity for Little Wolf to explain differences in training philosophy, how Apache methods emphasized partnership while traditional ranch methods often relied on dominance. But more importantly, it allowed him to discuss how different approaches could achieve similar goals, a lesson that extended far beyond horse training.
The afternoon session moved to the workshop where Morningstar taught traditional crafts alongside practical business skill. Her graduation certificate from the Territorial Commerce Academy hung beside examples of her beadwork, representing her ability to bridge traditional artistry with modern market demand. "Today we're calculating the material costs for your beadwork projects," she announced to a group of older students. "Remember, understanding your expenses is just as important as creating beautiful work." Running Deer's daughter, now 16 and showing her father's quick mind for complex problems, worked alongside Betty Kowalski's nephew, whose family had sent him from Silver Creek to learn skills that would serve him well in territorial business. The collaboration between students from different backgrounds had become so natural that few of them thought about cultural differences anymore. Tommy entered the workshop carrying a letter that bore the territorial seal, his expression mixing excitement with concern. As the official liaison between their community and territorial government, he received regular correspondence about policy changes and funding opportunities. "What news?" Morningstar asked, noting his expression. "The territorial legislature is considering our community as a model for a new type of school system," Tommy replied. "They want to establish similar programs throughout the territory, with federal funding for integrated education that combines traditional knowledge with modern curricula." The implications were enormous. What had begun as an experiment in cultural cooperation was being recognized as a solution to broader educational challenges facing the rapidly developing Western Territory. Little Wolf paused in his explanation of halter adjustment to listen as Tommy read selected portions of the letter aloud. Federal officials had studied their community for 2 years, documenting educational outcomes, economic development, and social stability that exceeded expectation. "They want to send a delegation next month," Tommy continued, "representatives from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Territorial Education Department, and Congress. If they approve our model, we could receive funding to train teachers for similar programs across the territory." Morningstar set down her beadwork, considering the magnitude of what was being offered. This could change everything for Native children throughout the territory. Instead of being forced to choose between traditional culture and modern education, they could have both. The letter also contained news about Tommy's own recognition. The territorial governor had nominated him for appointment as the first Native American Territorial Education Coordinator, a position that would require extensive travel but would give him influence over policy affecting hundreds of communities. "What do you think?" Tommy asked Morningstar, though her expression already suggested her answer. "I think Chief Ayana was right when he said we were meant for something larger than ourselves," she replied. "This is our chance to make sure no other children have to choose between their heritage and their future." As the school day ended and students returned to their various homes, Tommy stood in the doorway, watching Apache and white children walking together down the mountain trail, their easy friendship representing possibilities that few adults had imagined just 5 years earlier. 5 years later, Chief Ayana sat in his favorite spot, overlooking the valley, where the Apache settlement had grown into a thriving community of nearly 200 people. At 73, his hair had turned completely silver, but his eyes still held the wisdom and strength that had guided him through decades of change and challenge. Beside him rested the chief's headdress, an ancient symbol of leadership that he would soon pass to the next generation. The eagle feathers spoke of courage, the beadwork told stories of tribal history, and the sacred stones carried prayers from ancestors who had dreamed of a future where their descendants could live with dignity and purpose. The sound of children's laughter drifted up from the school where Little Wolf, now 18, and officially certified as a territorial educator, taught the next generation of students. His classes had expanded to include advanced horsemanship, wilderness survival, and what territorial authorities called cultural bridge building, skills that were increasingly valuable as communities throughout the territory sought to emulate their successful integration model. Tommy approached up the familiar trail, his territorial education coordinator badge catching the afternoon sunlight. At 22, he had grown into the kind of man Chief Ayana had hoped to nurture, strong in both Apache and American ways, respected by people from all backgrounds, and committed to using his influence to benefit others, rather than simply advance him. "Father," Tommy said, using the Apache word that had replaced Chief Ayana in private conversation years ago, "the territorial governor has approved the expansion program. 15 new schools will be established using our model." Chief Ayana nodded with satisfaction. The success had exceeded even his most optimistic expectations. When he first intervened in that Silver Creek courtroom 7 years ago, 2 frightened orphans had become leaders, whose influence extended far beyond their mountain community, and the federal recognition, the chief asked, approved. "Our community will be designated as the first official integrated cultural education center. Federal funding is guaranteed for at least 10 years, with renewable grants based on continued success." The designation meant more than money. It represented official acknowledgement that different cultures could strengthen each other, rather than competing for dominance, that children could benefit from learning multiple ways of understanding the world. Morning Star climbed the trail behind Tommy, carrying their 6-month-old son in a traditional cradleboard, decorated with symbols representing both Apache and American heritage. The baby, named Soaring Eagle in honor of Chief Ayana's deceased son, had become the community's symbol of hope for the future. "Grandfather," Morning Star said, using the term that honored Chief Ayana's role in their family, "the delegation from Washington wants to interview you for their official report. They're calling you a visionary leader whose courage changed federal policy." Chief Ayana smiled at the irony. 7 years ago, federal officials had questioned his fitness to raise white children. Now they sought his wisdom about cultural integration and educational innovation. "What will you tell them?" Tommy asked. The old chief was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the valley where Apache wickiups stood alongside frame houses, where children of different backgrounds played together naturally, where adults had learned to see diversity as strength, rather than threat. "I will tell them that love is stronger than law," he finally said, "that families form through choice as much as blood, that children thrive when they are accepted completely, rather than tolerated conditionally." He picked up the ceremonial headdress, feeling its familiar weight in his hand. "And I will tell them that this headdress has taught me the most important lesson of leadership. True power comes not from controlling others, but from helping them discover their own strength." Little Wolf joined them as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, his easy confidence a testament to the security he had found in this mountain home. At 18, he was being courted by territorial universities that wanted to study his innovative teaching methods, but he remained committed to the community that had raised. "The students want to plan a celebration for your retirement ceremony," Little Wolf told Chief Ayana, "something that honors both Apache traditions and American customs." Chief Ayana laughed, the sound carrying across the valley, like a blessing. "Tell them an old man's greatest celebration is watching young people surpass his accomplishment." As evening approached and the family prepared to return to their respective homes, Chief Ayana remained on the hillside for a few more moments. The headdress in his hands would soon pass to Tommy, marking the transition from one generation of leadership to the. But the true legacy wasn't the ceremonial objects or official recognition. It was the proof that courage could triumph over fear, that understanding could replace prejudice, and that families built on love could be stronger than those bound only by blood. In the distance, smoke rose from cooking fires, where Apache and white families prepared evening meals. Children of different backgrounds helped with daily chores, and adults planned tomorrow's work with the confidence of people who belonged exactly where they were meant to be.